Okay, we are here with Ann Chisa, the host of the Root of the Science podcast and one of our new podcast coaches for Thinkubator Media. So thank you so much for joining us, Ann.
Thank you, Laurie. It's lovely to join you and to join the team and hopefully help someone, start an amazing podcast.
Yeah, I think you're going to help lots of people start amazing podcasts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about your podcast first, and why you got that started?
Sure. So, in simple, my podcast is called the Root of the Science podcast, and the aim is to amplify Africans in STEM, so Africans all over the globe. The idea is to share inspiring stories from a diverse field, because I think whenever we think of science, we think of very limited categories of science. So it's to show the diversity of STEM. It's to educate people about the amazing work that scientists are doing, and also to showcase visible role models for the next generation so that they can see people who look and sound like them, who are doing some amazing things, by shifting that stereotypical narrative of what a scientist looks like.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Have you had any favorite interviews or most surprising interviews?
So it's been over 120 something.
That's a
But
lot of podcasts.
that's a lot of podcasts. But I think in the early beginning, I always go back to two that I can remember off the top of my head. One being with my mentor. She's late now. She was part of the reason who actually helped me start the podcast. Her name is Doni Kunu. She was the founder of Black Women in Science, and I was part of their fellowship. And when I did that fellowship in 2019, it just really opened my mind to see that there's more to being a scientist than what I thought. And she did really amazing things apart from being a scientist. She had the organization, and I was like, wow, I could do something like that. And even as I started my podcast, I would go back to her and ask for tips and tricks. And she was in these really amazing spaces, and it was so affirming. So when we had that conversation, it was just sort of beautiful because she was sort of like showing the roadmap, not only to me, but to everybody else who didn't know how to do it, but she was sort of showing that. So that was one of them. And then one was also with now her name is Kimberly Tommy. It was also early 2020. She's a science communicator as well, biological anthropologist. And I love that episode because when she was speaking about her science and what she does, she explained it so well. Duh, she's a science communicator, but in in such a way that it really kept the science right, but it was so captivating for somebody. And I remember my mom was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting, you know. And that was when like the click happened. It was like I think the first 5 episodes, and I was like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. So yeah, just to keep it short and brief, those two. And not to minimize the rest, there've been a lot, but just those two
It was a tough
stand out.
question to ask. I made you choose from
Yeah.
like a great list. So, so
It's like
thanks for
picking a
answering that.
favorite child.
I know, it's true, it's true. So can you talk about your scientific background and a little bit too? Because I think that's a really interesting piece, especially for folks who are scientists and looking to start podcasts. I think they would be curious to know what else you do other than the podcast.
I'm a scientist as well, currently doing a PhD in crop science, so agriculture at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Um, and I'm currently working on legumes, different types of legumes. So the main reason why I started my podcast was because I was a scientist, and I felt there was a bit of a disconnect between how we as scientists communicate our findings and our research, because I felt like, listen, we spend so much time, experiments don't work, effort, and I just sort of felt like our work is shelved, or rather maybe not shelved, but it's got such a limited audience. And I felt like the people who I was doing the science for, so I work with a lot of small scale farmers, they don't quite get to hear the results as often of what I did, and as scientists at the core, we are trying to solve societal issues. So I realized that the way that we communicate our science is mainly for other scientists and not for everybody else, and everybody else would be keen to know what we're doing. So my idea of being a science communicator in my podcast is sort of to be that bridge, that medium, so that I can understand where the scientists are coming from in terms of the experimental designs, in terms of their protocol and what they're trying to do. And then I'm trying to be like, okay, you have this protocol, this design, but how can we communicate it effectively, so that, lay people can hear it, policymakers can hear it, etc. So I chose podcasting because I love to talk. And there's various other ways to do it, but I just thought podcasting was pretty unique. And I think it's such a perfect and wonderful medium as well, because it also helps scientists become better communicators, not only in terms of just speaking in front of people, but you are telling a story, right? We are storytellers, even when we write our theses, when we're writing our papers, and we're able to be more effective storytellers. And that's what a paper or a journal is trying to do. So I think that's where the beauty of me being a scientist and working with scientists comes in, is that I understand. I understand. I really do. But I also, but I just want us to maybe find an interesting or creative way so that people can actually, want to hear about what you're doing, because I want to honor that time. You spent years, 2, 3 years, maybe 4 years doing this research. Let it not just be on the web somewhere, let it be somewhere where somebody who would have never come across it is like, wow, this is so interesting. A biological anthropologist. You probably didn't even know that that existed. So that's what I want to do. Exactly.
Yeah, and I love that too because you sit in a sweet spot where you can talk both languages. You
Mm,
can speak and relate to the scientists in their and in when they may speak more jargon than like the general public would understand, but then you're kind of able to walk them through communicating that their work in a different way because I agree. I think the public should know what science is going on. People should be really excited about science, and the only way folks are going to get excited about that work is if they understand it.
mm,
And
mm,
so that's where your podcast is so valuable, and so it's so helpful in terms of kind of spreading information about what kind of scientists are out there. I mean, I've seen your roster of scientists, and they really do run the gamut of the STEM disciplines.